thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here with y'all today, making some Hamantaschen. Purim is one of my favorite holidays, mainly because I love to eat Hamantaschen. So we're going to start off by making our dough. This is a cream cheese based dough. This dough actually I also use for a ruggelette too. So if you ever want to save it and use it for other things, you totally can. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with our bowl for a mixer, and we're going to add some softened cream cheese, half a pound in there. And I just left that out for maybe an hour before we started class. So it's pretty soft, but it's not like super soft. Doesn't have to be out all day. It's fine. And then we're going to add half a pound of butter as well at room temperature. If these things aren't at room temperature, that's fine. The friction from your mixer will kind of bring it up to that temperature. We're also going to add some salt in there now, or you can add it in with your flour. It doesn't matter. We're going to throw that on the mixer. We're going to start mixing that on speed 2 for about 3 or 4, let's say 3 minutes really, just into order to get that mixer kind of homogeneous and even looking. You don't want to go too long. You're not really trying to incorporate air into your dough. You're just trying to make it creamy. So we'll let that go. And in this bowl over here, I have 2 cups of all-purpose flour and a 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon that I'm going to add to it. If you don't like cinnamon, you can totally add any flavoring at this point that you prefer. So whether that could be orange zest or lemon zest or whatever spice of your favorite, feel free to substitute that out and change whatever it is that you're going to add to it. Sometimes it's really nice, depending on your filling. Let's say if you're going to do a lemon marmalade, you can put lemon zest in there and kind of add more of that flavor to it. Vanilla is always a good option too. In fact, there's quite a lot less since this butter and cream cheese was pretty soft to begin with. I'm going to show you what this looks like and where you want to kind of bring this mixture to. And again, we're really not mixing for that long. We're just mixing to make them more equal. So if you look over here, everything is really soft and I don't see any differences in it. It looks nice and even. There isn't like big lumps of cream cheese or anything, or butter is nice and evenly incorporated. So we're going to just scrape our bowl down just to make sure that there isn't any bits at the bottom that didn't get incorporated. And then we're going to add all of this flour mixture with our cinnamon into it. It's important when you add your dry ingredients to make sure that when you turn your machine on that you really keep it on a low speed in the beginning. Mainly because if it's too high, what's going to happen is your flour is going to puff up everywhere and you're going to have a big mess on your hands. So we always start on a lower speed. And then you can always raise it after that. But for the initial 30 to 45 seconds, you want to just make sure that's on a nice low speed. So while that mixes, we're going to get our egg wash ready. So I very simply, I don't really add too much to my egg wash. It's just going to be 1 egg. I'm going to crack it into this little bowl here. Just give it a really light breaking with a fork. You don't have to worry too much about it. It's nothing that's that crazy. Egg wash is great because it's basically, in my opinion, pastry glue. So this is going to help us to form our Hamantaschen and make sure that they don't fall apart and open out while we bake them. Because we all know, if you've made them before, it's always really disappointing when you have that one open baked Hamantaschen that you didn't really need to make. It still tastes just as good. So this dough, super duper fast to make. It's already ready to go. That must have been maybe what, a minute and a half. So I'm going to get all of my dough just off of this hook first, and I'll show you what this looks like so you know where you want to bring it to. Okay, so right here we have our Hamantaschen dough. As you see, it's not completely smooth yet. We're going to kind of knead it together to get it there. But there's no flour at the bottom of our bowl. Everything's been stuffed up into that dough. So it's one nice homogeneous mixture. So we're going to dump this out onto our table. And you'll see it is pretty soft, and that's fine. That's the way it should be. That's one of the nice things about this dough, especially for forming things like marula or hamantaschen. It's very pliable, and that's why I like to use it so much. I also like the fact that we don't add sugar to it, since you're going to add a sweet filling to it anyway. This way, it's just not overpowering. So as you see, it really easy to knead together. We're not like forcing it together. I'm just trying to get it into one even block so that it's easier for when I roll it out. So right over here, I just have some more AP flour that I'm going to dust my surface with really lightly, just to make sure that as I'm rolling, we don't have any sticking onto the table. So a little on there, a little on top, and as well, we're going to put some on a rolling pin. I prefer to use a straight rolling pin versus a tapered one, just because I think it's a bit more even. But to each their own. If you like yours, by all means, use whatever you have on hand. If you don't have a rolling pin, what works really well is a wine bottle, as I learned in college. So as we roll this out, you're just going to want to slowly move your dough ever so often, just to make sure they are not sticking. So instead of me maybe rolling it out this way and having it kind of feel awkward because my arm's over here, I'm just going to simply move my dough over, and that way I know it hasn't stuck to the table at all, and that it'll be nice and even. What we're going to look for is about 1 centimeter thick dough. Again, you don't have to be too crazy specific about it. If you have one of those really great rolling pins that have the clip-ons on the side, then that's what you'll take it to. But if you don't, that's fine as well. You see, it's really a nice dough. It really rolls out super easy. It's not fussy at all, which I like a lot. You could always make this the day ahead of you wanting to make your hamantaschen and let it sit in the fridge. As you see, it's not necessarily necessary to do that, but if you are going to do that, you're just going to want to pull that dough out maybe half an hour before you plan on rolling it out, because it's going to be really hard because of all that fat we put into it. So all that cream cheese and all that butter. And when it gets to fridge temperature, just like when you pull it out of your refrigerator, it's kind of hard and it's really hard to smooth onto something. So you just want to kind of let it sit out for a little bit. So our dough is just about there. I'm just going to even it out a little bit. But what I find for myself, for making it nice and even, I kind of just run my hands along it, and I'm just looking to feel any unevenness to it. Sometimes it actually helps if I close my eyes while I do it. I don't know why. Maybe it's just something I made up one day. Okay, so we're nice and even now. Now we're going to cut out our dough. So right here I have about a 4-inch ring cutter that is round. If you don't have a fancy cutter like that, what works really well is glass. So you can invert and just cut those shapes out as well. So we're going to cut all of them. This is one dough that I really don't like to re-roll and use. I tried to do that one year, and what happened is that all the hamantaschen opened up. So it's a little sad. So what I do with my leftover scraps generally is I just kind of roll them out into another random shape and toss them with a little bit of granulated sugar and bake them separate as just like a little snack so that I don't have to waste everything, because I really don't like doing that. So we're going to get rid of all of our scraps over here and just put them off to the side. You're not going to want to have them left out for too long because they will dry out eventually, but we're going to do this pretty fast, so no worries. So let's see, I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 rounds. It might have gotten 10 if I paid a little bit more attention to how I was cutting those. Got a little bit more scrap than normal, but that's fine. Okay, so we have all of our rounds right here. And then we're going to start to fill our hamantaschen. So the nice thing about this is you can really kind of do whatever you want. I prefer to use a jam or maybe Nutella or something like that in the middle. My mom used to always put Hershey's Kisses in the middle. So what I have right here is some Nutella and some Meyer lemon and poppy seed jam that I made myself. But you can use anything you could really find, whatever your favorite flavor is. We're also doing apricot this year and raspberry. So what I'm going to do is take a small spoonful, about a tablespoon or so of jam. I'm going to put that right in the middle. You don't want to go too much on the fillings If you go really heavy on them, the only thing that's going to happen is it's going to kind of volcano out of the top. It isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's just not going to you're not going to have more filling inside the cookie itself. Same thing with the Nutella, just about a tablespoon or so, right in the middle. You could use peanut butter too. My cousins really like it when I make them peanut butter and jelly ones. So I just take some Concord grape jelly and a little bit of peanut butter and put smaller scoops of each in the middle. Great. All the fillings are in there. We're gonna grab that egg wash, just that beaten egg that we just beat a little bit ago. We're gonna take a pastry brush. Any brush will do. If you don't have a pastry brush, you can just use your fingers and kind of roll it around there. It's perfectly fine. And we're just gonna get all the edges up here. Even though we might not necessarily pinch it all in those areas, better safe than sorry, I always think. You're not gonna taste the egg wash at all. It's just gonna kind of provide you a little extra security in your bake. So as we go to fill these, what I like to do is kind of just put them in my hand. So I'm going to take one side and I'm going to pinch. And I'm going to pinch fairly forcefully, maybe a bit more forceful than you think. So I have just about 3 pinches there. And I'm going to turn my Hamantaschen. I'm going to pinch 3 more times. And then 3 more times here. Now I have this beautiful, nice triangular Hamantaschen. There are a few other ways that people like to do them too that you're more than welcome to do if you like. So you could always take and just fold. What reason I don't prefer this method is because on my edges, I'm going to get a double layer of dough, which to me sometimes can be a little bit dry. But everyone has their own way to do that. Generally, like your mom showed you. So that works as well. And the last way that I've seen someone do too, which kind of gives you a little bit less edge and kind of a bigger filling. So I'll just lay this on the table and I'm going to take them. I'm going to pinch only right there in the center. And this way I have a really big opening on top, which is kind of just your personal preference, honestly, of how you like to do it. The one thing that I really like to make sure is that while you're pinching your dough, that you really want to be, you don't obviously push all the way through the dough, but the more forceful you do it, the less likely they are to open. As well, I prefer to give my Hamantaschen a little bit of a freeze before I bake them as well, just to kind of prevent that from happening, from them opening up at all, just so they really stay nice and triangular. It's just really sad when they don't do that. And for a restaurant where we have a certain amount of orders, it just means I gotta keep baking more stuff, and that's not always the most efficient way to do things. So we're just gonna keep forming these. I'm gonna go again, 3 pinches, and on this side, 3 pinches. And I love these because they're so great for, kids to build. They're really easy. When I first learned how to make them, I believe I was at Temple and my mom was teaching a class. I must have been maybe 6 or 7 years old. And that's when I first learned how to make Hamantaschen. And it was so much fun. I love that you could, grab different fillings and kind of do whatever you wanted to. We would put a lot of candy bars in them and stuff. But it was just so great to kind of have something that you could make yourself. So it's definitely a great one, if the grandkids are around or something, to do with them. Okay, so all of our Hamantaschen are formed now. What I like to do is a little bit of an extra. I like the texture it gives as well as the finish. So I'm going to take my Hamantaschen, I'm going to egg wash all my edges, and I'm going to put some turbinado or sugar in the raw on the sides of them. What's nice about it is it's going to give you a really nice crunch on your Hamantaschen, as well as they're going to be really glittery and beautiful when you're done baking them. And, sometimes it's nice to have things that are just as pretty, as delicious as they taste. So there you go. I just kind of sprinkle it on there and let the excess fall back into my bowl because it is going to be a little bit messy. As you see, the egg wash just made it stick on really nicely. And we'll just keep lining those up. So we're going to do that to all of them. Of course, if you don't want to, or if you maybe want it a little bit more of a savory flavor, you can skip that step if that's not your personal preference. If you don't have sugar in the raw or vanilla sugar, you can always use regular white granulated sugar. No problem at all. And I do like these more open ones a little bit because they're, to me, resemble a little bit more of either a pocket or Haman's ears as Hamantaschen are supposed to be. Though I always learned that it was a hat when I was little. I guess someone didn't tell me the accurate story. I have done savory ones as well. So like a nice cheese filling can be really great in the middle if that's what you want to do. There are so many options and the dough is so versatile since it isn't sweetened yet, besides the fact that we're going to add sugar on the sides of it like this. So you can really kind of do whatever you want with it, which is really, I think, lovely. So I would definitely hang on to this recipe for any of your other baking things or for making rugelach if that's what you want to do, which is also very delicious. So after I build all these, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop them in the freezer for at least half an hour. You could put them in there for longer. If you only want to, say, bake yourself 1 or 2 cookies right now, totally doable. Keep the rest of them in the freezer and bake them off whenever you want. That way they're always nice and fresh. And you don't have to be maybe overwhelmed by eating a lot of things at once. For me, generally, since I live by myself, making a cake or a dozen cookies or something can be a little bit too much than I necessarily want to eat. So I just keep some of it in the freezer for myself for later. Okay, now our Hamantaschen are all nice and done. I'm gonna wipe off my hands a little bit because I made a bit of a mess, but that's what happens. It's fine. Okay, and we're gonna pop these into the freezer and then into the oven. So I like to bake these at 350 degrees for about 15 to 20 minutes or until they're just nice and golden brown on the outside. It's perfectly fine if you start to see them kind of exploding out the middle. That's what's going to happen because you have sugar and you have liquid in there, which is basically jam. And so as it boils, it's just going to kind of rise a bunch. Don't worry about it at all. I think it looks kind of nice on the outside. You could always pick that part off if you don't like the way it looks. And as you see right here, this is what our Hamantaschen are going to look like. So this is the reason why I like building them the way I do, pinching those pretty sides like that. Because as you see, you can see the seam right there. I don't have a double layer of dough, which is what I prefer because that way I just get a really nice, crisp and filling like bite with every single bite versus having one be kind of dry and then one be like all the jam. Makes it a bit more even. So these are the Meyer lemon poppy seeds. You see, just like I said, they kind of exploded out a little bit as I baked them. They just fell right back down once they're cool. And that's perfectly fine. I think it looks kind of pretty. As well as the sugar on the outside. I love the finish it gives to it. It's just really nice and glittery. And the texture is great as they sit too, because I think Hamantaschen luckily are one of those cookies that sits much better than others. It doesn't really get too dry. And that actual egg wash and the sugar on the outside is going to kind of keep all that moisture where you want it to be. If you think about egg wash as almost like a moisture barrier, it's a great way to use it, as well as it's just going to keep everything nice and moist in the middle so you get your jam filling or your Nutella or whatever have you. Really nice and melty still, and the dough not being too dry. So texturally, it's just a little bit better in my opinion. But that's, you know, whatever you want. So since I have this leftover dough here, talked about how I just kind of use it for something else because it doesn't bake very well. It just opens up a lot because you have so much fat. You're almost, as you push it back together again, you're almost laminating your dough. So you're creating more layers of your butter and your cream cheese. Then when it bakes, it's going to expand a bunch and they're going to kind of open up. So I don't like to use it for anything else for Hamantaschen, but I do like to eat it still. So I'm just going to take this. Again, just a little bit of dusting on both sides. And you saw I just kind of formed it into more of a cohesive mass, but I'm not kneading it together or anything. I don't want to make it tough. Since there's so few ingredients in here, the more you work your dough, the tougher it's going to become versus being nice and flaky. So I'm just going to roll this out really fast. It's about a square shape. Grab a knife. And we're just gonna kind of cut this into little strips. And let's say these are about half an inch to an inch thick. I'm not really measuring it all. This is kind of just like my little treat, you know, since I really don't like wasting things. It's just not great. And no one used to really ever even see them. They don't even know they exist. It's just for me. So I'm gonna take some more of that egg wash that we had on there and just really lightly brush on top just to make some of our sugar stick to it. And sprinkle that on there. And we're just gonna kind of twist these scraps up. This sugar on this one. Just like this, just like you would think. Kind of just into a nice little roll. Then I'm gonna egg wash it a teeny bit more on top. And then we can just throw those in the oven and have a little snack for ourselves. These will probably expand a bunch in the oven, which is perfectly fine. Again, it's just kind of a way to use our waste so that we're not being wasteful and that we're still, you know, using all of our product. Because it really stinks when you have to roll something out like this and then you have to throw away almost half of what you made. But there's really no way to kind of avoid it. So we'll just throw these in the oven at 350 degrees for about 10 minutes or so, just until they have a nice golden brown on the outside. It shouldn't take too long. They'll keep really nicely in a Tupperware or something else that will keep it the air from it. You could as well take this as, like you said with the Hamantaschen, you could take these, put them in your freezer on a sheet tray so that they get nice and hard, and then just kind of leave them in there and bake them off whenever you want for a little treat. And that way, maybe you don't have as much things laying around and you don't have to worry about consuming all this stuff right away. You can kind of just do it whenever you feel like it. Sometimes too, I like to add maybe a little spice or something in here. So maybe a little bit more of that cinnamon would be nice if you're a cinnamon sugar kind of person. I also really love cardamom. It's actually one of my favorite spices, which is great since we have to use it so much in Safta. So I do like to incorporate cardamom into a lot of stuff. So that could be great either in the dough or in this twisting process, either one of those things. Okay, there we go. We have these twists all nice and ready to go. And now we haven't thrown anything away, which is great. Something that my grandma would greatly approve of as well. And again, we'll just bake these just until they're golden brown, just so they get a nice crunch on the outside. And this way, you're just not going to have anything to throw away, which I think is personally my favorite way to do things. If you do want to roll them into Hamantaschen, which are more than welcome to do, just be careful; they might open up. Those of you I'd say you 100% want to freeze solid before you bake, just to kind of prevent that from happening. But it might happen anyway, so that's not a problem. They're still perfectly edible. So that is really all of our Hamantaschen flats. I'd say as far as for other things, if you wanted to adjust this recipe or make it your own, maybe make it a bit more kid-friendly if you plan on doing it with family or just for yourself. Other alternatives to this could be, say instead of putting sugar in the raw on the outside of these, you put sprinkles on them, which, you know, kids get much more excited about. Well, yeah, you can really, and if you want to do savory ones, you can put cheese in the middle, and you can put some kind of spice on the outside, whether it's red chili flakes or something else, and kind of like really experiment with it. One of my favorite ones, though it's kind of a little bit wrong, is to put haroset in the middle. It's one of my favorite things to do, but it's just not exactly right because then you have, you know, lemons right on the outside of your Passover thing. But, you know, sometimes you want haroset when it's not Passover. Does anyone have any questions about anything?
So our first question was just, there were other examples in the recipe list of using lemon zest or vanilla. Someone was wondering about proportions of those to put in there.
So I would say I would do half a lemon zested into it, unless you really like that lemony flavor, and then you can put the whole thing in it. It's definitely nothing's bad's gonna happen. And I'd say as far as for vanilla, a tablespoon should do you perfectly. You could always add more. Nothing bad is gonna happen by adding more vanilla unless you just made your dough watery and threw the whole thing inside. But I'd say 1 tablespoon of vanilla, about half a lemon would probably be really quite perfect and lovely in it.
Can you use a hand mixer or do you need the electric one?
No, you can totally use a hand mixer. Just kind of be careful with hitting the sides of your bowl. You could also do this by hand. I'd say the only thing if you're doing it by hand is to really, really make sure your stuff is at room temperature, just so that you don't have to put quite so much strength behind it. But since if everything is soft, then it should come together very easily either way. But a hand mixer is a great alternative if you don't have a stand mixer, which is perfectly acceptable.
Someone was wondering just about rugula. I don't know, could this kind of be adapted into that?
100%. So if you're going to make rugula with this, you'd almost need your same exact set of ingredients. So you're going to take that dough ball that we made, and you're going to roll it out into more rectangular shape. I try to not let the side that I'm rolling up into get too long so that my rugula aren't huge. So I'd say maybe about 9 inches or so wide, and the rest as wide as you can go. And you're going to spread one even layer of same kinds of fillings, either whatever you want. Nutella would be lovely, any kind of jam, into a nice even area. What I like to do is take either a tea towel or a piece of parchment and have my dough sitting on top of that, so I can kind of use it to assist me in getting a tight roll, almost like you're making sushi or something. So I can just kind of roll it over and use that to make it. So then you're going to roll all that up, and then you're going to take that rugula that you made, put it in the fridge for at least half an hour before you cut your pieces. So that way your dough doesn't, you don't lose your nice round and don't make it all nice and flat. So you're gonna put that in the fridge for about half an hour, and then you're gonna cut your pieces in about 1 inch wide piece. Egg wash them on top. You can finish it with turbinado sugar if you want or not, whatever your preference is. And then you can put those in the oven. To make them at 350 degrees for about 20 minutes. So a little bit longer than the Hamantaschen because they're a bit denser. It's about 20 minutes until they're golden brown on top as well.
Okay. Can you use almond flour, and can you substitute for gluten-free?
You could substitute for gluten-free. I would say almond flour, I would not want to substitute 100% of the way because almond flour lacks elasticity to it. It makes it really quite coarse dough, so you might have some issues trying to form it. What I would do is maybe use almond flour in conjunction with another flour. So chickpea flour would be lovely. Something that's more starchy, like a rice starch or a potato starch or a corn starch, in combination with your almond flour would make it easier to use dough. So I would say a cup of almond flour, and then maybe a cup of chickpea flour or any of those starches would be perfect together. If you do a lot of gluten-free baking too, I'm sure you have either guar or xanthan gum around, which kind of helps to give you more elasticity to your dough too. So I'd probably add just about maybe 1 teaspoon or a half a teaspoon into my dough just to make it a bit more formable. Other than that, you're totally more than welcome to do that. You should have not really any issues. with making it. It might be a little bit harder to form, but you should be just fine.
What is the minimum time to put them in the freezer? I know you said 30 minutes. So what would be the minimum before baking?
I would say, well, it's going to depend a little bit on how room temperature your butter and your cream cheese are, right? Because those are the things that you're really trying to freeze in that dough. So I would say the minimum amount would be 20 minutes. If they were really, really soft, you should be fine. But basically, if you can touch them and you can feel they're frozen, you're not really able to move the dough at all, it's pretty set. That's kind of where you want to leave them at. So 20 minutes would be probably the minimum. It'll also slightly depend though on your freezer. If it's, on its cycle up or down, it might take a little bit longer or less time. Nothing bad is going to happen if you don't freeze them. They just might open up a little bit. And the reason I always take that precaution is because generally when I have to bake them, it's like 600 Hamantaschen, and it really stinks if 500 come out correctly and the other 100 don't.
Do you mind repeating what the dough ingredients are?
Yeah, so it's very simple. So you have 4 main ingredients and then one that's going to be your flavor that is whatever your personal preference. In this case, is cinnamon. So we had unsalted room temperature butter, cream cheese at room temperature, all-purpose flour and salt, and then we added cinnamon to it. It's very important whenever I make recipes, I always use unsalted butter because I always add some salt into my recipe. Salt is a flavor enhancer for anything. It's not just for savory food, but I like to be able to control the amount of salt that I'm adding to my thing. So if I'm using salted butter, I have an uncontrollable variable of however much they salted that butter. Maybe I want more or less. If you are using salted butter, cut the additional salt out of the recipe so that it's not salty on taste. But I would recommend just using unsalted butter instead.
And lastly, what kind of cheese would you use if you did it savory?
I would use something that would melt nicely, but might not get too hard as it cools. So generally what I do is I probably take some cream cheese and mix it with another cheese. So whether it's cream, let's say a quarter cup of cream cheese and then maybe a quarter cup of shredded cheddar cheese, that would be really nice because it would stretch nicely and it would bake well, but it wouldn't get dry and kind of weird as it's sad. Like a grilled cheese kind of gets strange as it isn't cold, as it isn't hot anymore. So I'd use my cream cheese kind of as a buffer for that. What we've done before too is basically use pimento cheese. So you already have all those things mixed in there. And so it bakes really nicely and has a good consistency already.
Just got another one. Do you put the frozen Hamantaschen directly into the 350-degree oven?
Directly into the oven. I like to take my sheet tray and line it with either parchment or a silk hat, just so I don't have to clean up as much afterwards. But I just pull them right out of the freezer onto the sheet tray and right into the oven. You don't have to worry about them expanding too much. They're pretty much going to maintain their exact shape. So as far as for distance on your sheet tray, they can be fairly close to each other. I'd say you probably want maybe half an inch to an inch of space in between just for safety's sake, but they're not really going to change too much from the shape and the size they are when you put them in the oven from when they come out of the oven.
Besides Nutella, would you suggest any other chocolate filling, or is Nutella best?
Yeah, any other chocolate would be great. If you wanted to make a ganache or something like that, awesome. If you, let's say, don't want to go through that process, you can take something that's basically already there. So maybe a Ferrara Rocher would be so delicious in there. It would melt just the right amount, but you still get texture. Any kind of pre-made truffle would be great. Just going to do that same exact thing. And then you could also use really any kind of candy bar or even just a piece of chocolate. I always had Hershey's Kisses in mine when I was little, and they work beautifully. Or you could put little small, Halloween-sized candy Snicker bars or something like that. Really whatever you want. You're pretty safe with everything. I'd say the one thing that I wouldn't put into them would be marshmallows because they get funny when they bake and they tend to make a really big mess. So I'd be the one place where I would not put them in there just because it'd probably be a really big mess.